Welcome to our sixth class, ongoing classes in the book called Sefer Sheva Mitzvot HaShem, Volume 1, which is the original of the Divine Code. And we are currently still in the Mavoi, in the introduction, in the preface, and we are currently on page 36, in the middle of the page, the paragraph that begins with the letter Aleph. We are discussing the Rambam, Maimonides' view, and the other codifiers, the other Rishonim, the Rambam's contemporaries, who argue with the Rambam. The last point that we made up to this point, the previous class, was that, for instance, the Ravad, which is the main critic of the Rambam, doesn't argue on principle with the Rambam's view. Rather, his disagreement is on the details, on the specifics. But the general idea that the Rambam tells us that the Jewish people need to, and the key word that we keep using over here is lachoif, or commonly pronounced lakuf, which translated into English, depending on the content and on the context in which it's used, either means to force or to compel. You'll find the word used in various different situations, and it doesn't always mean to literally force someone in the sense of using threats or physical force, but it surely is an intense word, and it really means to strongly compel. Be that as it may, the Ravad agrees with the Rambam that it is the obligation and the duty of the Jewish people to be koife, to impose or to compel all of the Bnei Noach, all of the non-Jews, to keep their 7 mitzvahs Bnei Noach, the 7 universal Noahide commandments, because they are God-given through Moshe Rabbeinu, through Moses. That's the basic point, and that's the point that the Ravad does not disagree with. And the proof is, he doesn't comment. Just to remind you what we said in last class, one of the primary rules in the study of Maimonides and in understanding the, so to say, mechanics of it, is that any time the Ravad doesn't argue by default, so to say, it means that he agrees and approves what the Rambam says. Right? We can't always use that logic or that ruling, but in the case of Rambam and Ravad, that is, so to say, a golden rule that the commentaries and those that set out the rules of how to study and how to understand Maimonides' work agree that that's the way that it works, because otherwise the Ravad will not be bashful or ashamed to really dig into the Rambam, and sometimes he doesn't mince any words, and he can be very, very forceful. So whenever the Ravad doesn't argue, that means that he agrees. All right. So now we want to understand what exactly does the Rambam mean? How, when, who, what situation does a Jew need to force the non-Jew, and to what extent, and what does that mean? And then we're going to discuss what about the others? What do they say, the Ravad and the others? So again, in the middle of page 36, Aleph. A. La Rambam koifin ad kedei vim lav yeharig kol mi she'yadenu maseges. According to the Rambam, we, the Jewish people, force up to the point that if the person refuses and doesn't accept the 7 Noahide commandments, we will kill him. That situation is as long as we have the power to do that. So long as the Jewish people have that type of governing force and that type of rulership, then that's the extent that we take it to. We tell the non-Jews that are living under our rule that these are the 7, accept them, and if you do, wonderful, and if not, we kill. Well, our Ravad, and according to the Ravad, rak elu shetachas yadenu, we only go to that extent of forcing them in such a way to those non-Jews that are actually under our control, kigoin, for example, geirim teishavim vavodim v'yefas toyar. Someone who's a ger toishav, which we've discussed many times, and again, especially for those that may not have been with us for the previous classes, very briefly, a ger toishav is a non-Jew that would like to take up residence in the Holy Land of Israel, and normally the Jewish people are not allowed to allow a non-Jew to live in the land of Israel, but there's an exception. Someone who is a ger toishav, which means that he formally, in front of the Jewish court, accepts upon himself to keep the 7 Noahide commandments, and then he becomes what's called a ger toishav, which means that he has the right to live in the land, and the Jewish people and the community, the Jewish community, actually has an obligation to take care of him, and he earns certain rights, and he's not treated like the regular goy / nochri or akum. He's not a regular goy. He is absolutely not Jewish. However, he's not a regular, typical non-Jew. And then the Rambam, every time he mentions ger toishav, tells us that we cannot accept ger toishav other than the time when the Yovel, the Jubilee year, is in effect. And in order for the Jubilee year to be in effect, according to the Rambam, we have to have all the Jewish people residing in the land of Israel, which basically means that even prior to the destruction of the first temple, the Jubilee year, unfortunately, was no longer in effect. So we do not have ger toishav nowadays. But be that as it may, if there were to be a situation of a ger toishav, and ger toishav means that you have a non-Jew living legally by Jewish law, and please don't confuse it with today's Israel, which again, I mentioned that in the previous class, I don't want to get into that. I have a feeling that one of these classes we will get into that, and I may even devote an entire class to that, but not yet. So legally by Torah law, biblically speaking, if someone were to be a ger toishav, which again, we haven't had a ger toishav for the past 2,500 years or so, if you were to have a ger toishav, which means that that individual is under full jurisdiction and control of the Jewish community, or an Eved Kanaani, and again, very briefly to remind you, Eved Kanaani is a non-Jewish slave. He's a non-Jew from any nation who belongs to a Jew. He is the property of a Jew, which means that the Jew has full control over him. He's not just a hired worker. And for that matter, the Yefas Toyar. And again, very briefly, Yefas Toyar is the unusual case where a Jewish soldier goes out to war, and in the enemy territory, he sees a beautiful woman, which he desires to take for himself, So then the Torah prescribes in detail, with very specific detail, how he can take her. And he brings her home, and the Torah tells us to do certain things to discourage him from wanting to keep her. But if after that he wishes to keep her, then there are two options. Either she converts to Judaism and she becomes a full Jewish woman, and he marries her, or alternatively, he sends her home. However, according to the Rambam at least, before he sends her home, she must accept upon herself to keep the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, the 7 universal Noahide commandments. If she does, she goes home free as a non-Jewish woman back to her home. If she doesn't, then she would be put to death. So those types of people, Ger Toishav, Eved, and Yifas Toyar, there the Ravad would agree with the Rambam that the Jew, or the community, the Jewish community, has full control over these people. Aval umois rechoikos, however, nations that are far away, they're not in the land of Israel, and we don't have any real jurisdiction over them. They're not under the sovereignty of the Jewish nation. Sheratzu lahashlim b'mas v'shibud levad. And, for instance, the Jewish people choose to do what's called a milchemes reshus. They would like to wage a war, which is not obligatory. It's an optional war that the Jewish nation decides for what reason they want. It could be a political reason, a financial reason, whatever. It's really irrelevant, so long as the king wants to do it, and he has approval by the Sanhedrin, by the Supreme Court, and perhaps they would consult with a prophet, who may consult with the high priest, with his breastplate, not getting into all the details. When the Jewish people decide to go out to war and to conquer some land, which may be far away from the biblical land of Israel, and it's not part of the Holy Land. So now, we tell them, we are ready to attack. But before we attack, we're sending you a message of peace. And in order to live peacefully, and in order for us not to come in and to attack and to kill you, you need to accept upon yourself, and this is according to the Ravad as opposed to the Rambam, to pay taxes and to accept our sovereignty, meaning our laws. However, that is not in a religious capacity, simply in a regular government relationship between citizens and their government. So in that case, if we are conquering land which is not part of the original land of Canaan, of the Holy Land of Israel, and they only need to pay taxes and to be under our jurisdiction, in a, so to say, a secular sense, says the Ravad, differently than the Rambam. This is where he differs. That we allow them to continue even in their idolatrous ways. They can continue worshiping whatever gods and nonsense and forbidden things that they are doing. One of the Sheva Mitzvot HaShem is the prohibition against worshiping Avodah Zarah. They may not worship anything other than God Almighty Himself. Not our business. According to the Ravad, we allow them to continue doing what they're doing. They can have all of the houses of worship that they want. They can have all of the idols and images, and they can do whatever they're doing. Not our business, because it's not in the Holy Land of Israel. In the land of Israel, the Torah does not allow any tolerance for avodah zarah, for idolatry. Out of the land of Israel, even if we are conquering that land, and they pay the Jewish people taxes, and they're under our sovereignty, we, the Jewish people, do not force them to accept the 7 Noahide commandments and to stop worshiping avodah zarah. This is all according to the Ravad. V'chein, and likewise, im yaver nachri b'artzeinu. How about if a non-Jew wants to pass through our land, just for business or To put it in modern terms, as we said in the previous class, he has a connection for his flight from one country to the next, and he's stopping off in Ben Gurion Airport. So according to the Rambam, as soon as he arrives at the border, as soon as he comes, immediately we tell him, do you accept to keep the 7 Noahide commandments? Sign right here that you accept it upon yourself. If not, kill him on the spot. The Ravad does not agree with that. The Ravad says that if a non-Jew is passing through our land, we will not force him to keep his commandments, to keep the 7 commandments. Since he is not dwelling amongst us in the Holy Land of Israel. Base B. La Rambam, Mishalei Ratz Lekabel Olav Oil Sheva Mitzvot Horgin Oisei Miyad. Afa Pishateram Avar Aleihem. According to the Rambam, and perhaps I should have said this at the very beginning of the class, maybe I should even start off each class making this, I don't know if it's a disclaimer, but making this clarification. We are learning, as I said, from this book called Sheva Mitzvot HaShem, which is an amazing, wonderful job done by Rabbi Moshe Weiner. This is his understanding. This is on his, so to say, responsibility. I am simply learning it with you. I'm reading the original text and I'm translating it and, to the best of my ability, trying to explain it. So if anything that we're saying isn't really accurate, it's not I who's saying that, it's the text. And he does have approbation from one of the greatest Torah scholars of the time today, one of the greatest, what we call a posek, a rabbi of modern day who gives legal rulings, and that is Reb Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg of Yerushalayim, of Jerusalem. So this is his understanding. This is Rabbi Weiner's understanding. According to the Rambam, if a non-Jew that we have some control over does not wish to accept upon himself the yoke of the 7 Noahide commandments, we kill him immediately, even though he didn't transgress anything yet. We tell him, do you hereby accept upon yourself to keep the 7 mitzvahs? And we say, here they are. And we pull out a paper or a card, and we say, are you familiar with the 7? Or we give him a book, and we tell him, here's the divine code. Do you accept upon yourself to keep the 7? If the individual says categorically, no, don't force religion on me. It's against my belief. I'm an atheist. I'm not interested. Whatever he says, according to the Rambam, on the spot, we say, come with us, and then he's just carried away, and kill him just like that. Decapitated. He didn't transgress anything yet. However, he refused to accept upon himself. He wouldn't sign on the dotted line. However, according to the Ravad, in the cases when we could force him, which we discussed in the previous piece, and in those cases where the Ravad agrees that he should be put to death, because the Ravad agrees that it's a capital offense, every one of the 7, we don't kill him until he transgresses. Once he transgresses, at that point, we kill him. Ve'oz yadun bedin shel beis din. And at that point, he is to be judged by the Jewish court. It's not up to any individual. You can't just have a Jew walk over to someone and say, hey, I warned you, and I saw that you transgressed this one of the 7 Noahide commandments, and then just pulls out his sword and kills him. No. He has to be brought to the Jewish court, and he has to be judged, and then the Jewish court would put him to death. Pafa, page 37. The Harayvid Yefaresh Mashakasav Rambam Hilchas Melachim Seif Perek Ches Lachuf B'nei Noach V'imlav Yeharig. The Ravad will interpret the words that the Rambam in the end of chapter 8 of the Laws of Kings says to force the B'nei Noach, the non-Jew, and if not, they will be put to death. Dehainu, meaning to say, the Ravad would tell you, Bizman shiodenu takifa. This only applies when our hand, when the Jewish hand is strong and we have control. Al derech shekosav Rambam Chosaved Zara Seif Perik Yud, similar to what the Rambam wrote all the way back towards the beginning, in the laws of idolatry, the end of chapter 10. V'yei hareg. And then, the Ben Noach, who is refusing to accept it, will be put to death. Kloimar, meaning to say, Al pi din davka. He has to be killed within a legal system. That's how the Ravad would explain it. V'chanizkar le'el, al pi atzofnas paneach. And as we mentioned earlier, several pages ago, based on the explanation of the well-known, famous Torah scholar, Torah giant of one generation ago, referred to as the Ragachover, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, who is commonly known in the Torah world as the Ragachover, author of the Tzofnas Paneach. He says, the pligi begeder yehareg. He explains that the Rambam and the Ravad are disagreeing. Their argument is, how do you categorize what exactly is the status of yehareg, that the Ben Noach shall be killed? The Ravad, who mitzadinim. According to the Ravad, the reason why he's to be killed is because, so to say, the seventh of the 7 Noahide commandments is to establish courts of law. And what are these courts supposed to do? They're supposed to uphold the 6 laws. There are 6 laws, and then there's the 7th one, which is, by the way, it's the only positive one. All the 6 are negative. The 7th one of dinim, of establishing a court system, a judicial system, that is how he would be killed. The yodun al kach beveistin, and he has to be judged in a court. There have to be witnesses, there has to be interrogation. I mean, it has to be a whole court case. And then, if the court determines that this person indeed transgressed, etc., then they kill him. And according to the Rambam, explains the Ragachover, no. That individual will be killed immediately without involving any court system. Because this individual is refusing to accept upon himself the very commandment. God said that every human being that's not Jewish needs to accept upon himself to keep these 7 laws. And if you have an individual who's refusing to accept them, that's it, enough, stop, right there and then. Everybody and anybody has the right, and actually should, kill him if they can. Just for not accepting. And now we continue after the brackets. Avol ein loymar, but we mustn't say the harayvet palig al etzem divrei harambam. Tziva Moshe Rabbeinu mipi agvura lachayf es kol boi ha'olam lekabel mitzvahs shnitzavu b'nei Noach. No. The Ravad does not argue or disagree, in essence, with the Rambam's words that Moses, our teacher, was commanded by God Almighty that we, the Jews, should force all the people of the world to accept the 7 commandments, the commandments which the sons of Noah were commanded. The Ravad agrees with that statement. V'soiver, and holds, and the Ravad would say, though, that when do we not allow a non-Jew the right to live if he's not keeping these 7? Only if he's amongst us. But if he doesn't live amongst us, meaning within the land of Israel, there's no mitzvah to even force him. That's the difference. So the Rambam takes it to an extreme. The Ravad says, no, I agree with you in the general concept. However, it only applies to all those Bnei Noach, all those non-Jews that live with us, amongst us, in the Jewish community, in the land of Israel. So in addition to what we already said, that the rule is, whenever the Ravad doesn't say anything, and he doesn't speak up and disagree, he agrees with the Rambam. So besides that here, in the Laws of Kings, when the Rambam makes this statement, the Ravad does not disagree. In addition to that, Mizeh Gufa, from this itself, She'anu mitzuvin lichpois ha'eved v'hanochri beinenu al kiyum sheva mitzvahs, from the very fact that we, the Jewish people, are commanded to force the eved, the non-Jewish slave, and the nochri, the non-Jew that lives amongst us in the land of Israel, to fulfill, to keep these 7. V'ir sheishlima v'ifas toyar, and likewise a city which is interested in making peace with us, or the case of the Yafas Toyar woman. Shma mina, from this we can understand, we can deduce that the Jewish people have an obligation to force them. Di'im loy, for if not, hayinu tzrichim lakufam. Di'im loy hayinu tzrichim lakufam klal lama nakuf ir sheishlima. If we weren't obligated to force them at all, so then why would we have to force a city that's far away from the land of Israel itself to keep it? And likewise, in the case of the Yafas Toyar woman, that we brought down from Sifri, from a Talmudical source, that if she refuses to become Jewish, so then he is to send her home to her father's home and not to the idolatrous home. That's how we learn out that she doesn't have the option of returning back to Avodah Zarah, and we have to force her. What do we care and what do we have to do with what the non-Jews are doing? But therefore we must say, we the Jews are responsible that we are responsible that they keep their 7 commandments because of the God-given commandment to Moses. And likewise, this seems to be the opinion of the Tosfos. Tosfos, as mentioned before, is not one person. Literally, it means the additional commentary, because they are in addition to the most basic commentary and the primary commentary, and that is Rashi. So in addition to Rashi in the Talmud, there is Tosfos, which was a whole school of great rabbis. Amongst them, some of them were Rashi's own grandchildren, and others. So Tosfos oftentimes will disagree with Rashi. So in this case, Tosfos maintains the yesh mitzvah lakuf bnei noach l'kayim sheva mitzvahs, that indeed there is a mitzvah, there is a commandment and an obligation for the Jew to force the non-Jew to keep his 7 mitzvahs. So far the Rambam, of course, holds that. The Ravad holds that as well. And now we're saying Tosfos does too. And now he's going to bring it down and explain. B'Tosfos Avodah Zarah. In Tosfos, in the tractate of Avodah Zarah, and as you can see at footnote 54, that would be on 26b. So Tosfos and Avodah Zarah on page 26b. Hikshu, they ask, Amai akum ein meiridin. Why do we not take an idolatrous person and push him down? And again, to remind you there's such a concept as mylin, and there's a concept of moiridin. Mylin means to bring up. Namely, if the person is in a situation where they need help, they need assistance, because otherwise they will die. So the classical example would be someone is hanging on for their dear life in a deep pit or on a cliff. So now, I, the bystander, have basically 3 choices of what to do. 1, Maile, I help him up. So I would throw him the tube, the life-saving net, the rope, whatever it may be. I grab hold, I pull him out. That is saving the person. The other extreme is Moiridin. I would push him down. He's still holding on for his dear life, and I take my foot and I step on his fingers to make him have to let go of the ledge, and then he falls to his death. And the third option would be I'm passive, and I walk away, and I, as they would say today in our culture, mind my own business. And I don't help him, and I don't harm him. Right? So those are basically the 3 options. So there are certain people where mylin, you have to save them. And if I, as a Jew, see a certain individual who's in that situation and I can save them, I must save them. I'm forbidden to mind my own business. I have to save his life. All right? Then there are certain people where I have an obligation to push him, to help him fall. And then there are people where I don't do a thing. And that would be Akum, a non-Jew, an idolater. Then the Jew is not to push him down. So Tosfos asks, at this point, according to what we're learning, it would seem to be a very straightforward and a very good question. Question is, if he's an Akum, he's an idolatrous person. He's serving Avodah Zarah. That means that he is to be put to death in any case. I should have killed him, so to say, if I could get away with that, if I had the power, whatever. And now that he's in that situation, why is the Jewish law that the Jew is not to push him down? Sheva Mitzvot HaShem. These types of people are transgressing their 7 commandments. They needed to be killed anyway. I'm supposed to kill him. So now he's hanging on for his dear life on that cliff, and you tell me, no, don't do anything. Don't do anything? I should step on his fingers. I should saw that little branch, whatever. V'tirtzu Tosfos, and Tosfos answers as follows. Ta'teira rib sa'isam leheter. There's a special inclusion that the Torah, the verse, makes in order to permit us not to kill them. Shenemar, because the verse says, Yulecholomas vavaducha, that they, referring to the case that we've been discussing about going out to war, and the Jewish people go out to an optional war just to conquer more land, not part of the original promised land. And then it says that they shall be, for you, for the Jewish people, as taxpayers and as servants. In other words, you're allowed to let them live. And what does the verse state? They pay taxes and they're under your jurisdiction. Kloimar, meaning to say, HaTorah itira shibud amim nachrim. The Torah permits subjugation of non-Jewish foreign nations. I'm allowed, we the Jewish community, the Jewish nation, the Jewish government, is permitted to have non-Jews, a non-Jewish city, a non-Jewish country, a non-Jewish tribe, become under our jurisdiction. With the exception, of course, of the 7 Canaanite nations. Those were not allowed to keep as slaves. Those were supposed to drive out of land, kill them. Lamas levad. But what does the verse say? They're only for paying taxes and serving us. Although they are still in their current state, worshipping idolatry. And yet, we can keep them. So from there we see that even though they're transgressing, and even though theoretically, if we can use that term, whoever is transgressing, any non-Jew that is worshipping Avodah Zarah, is transgressing a capital offense. It's true. And he should be put to death. The Jewish people have no responsibility and no obligation to kill him. According to Preface, no. And the proof is because we're allowed to take them and conquer their land and take taxes and have them serve us, even while they still worship Avodah Zarah. So that's why Preface explains, if a Jew sees an akum, someone he knows is transgressing the 7 Noahide commandments, and there's an opportunity, this person is now hanging out for his dear life. I mean, the person is on life support, and the Jew could just, shut down the machine, and boom, the person within minutes or whatever will be dead. No, forbidden. Why? It's not a regular Ben Noyach. This guy is an idolater. Nope. Ein Meridin. The Jew can't push him down. And the proof is, because we're allowed to conquer cities, countries, whatever, outside of the land of Israel, and we don't have to have them accept the 7 Noahide commandments, unlike the Rambam's approach. V'daitom kisvaras haramban v'ravad. So what he says over here is that their opinion of the Tosfos is just like the opinion of the Ramban, Nachmanides, and the Ravad. Namely, the Leitzifsa Torah Lases Milchemes HaRashus, the Torah does not command the Jewish people to go out and make an optional war, Avur Zeh Shekablu Mitzvos Bnei Noach, for this purpose of accepting the Noahide commandments. But rather it is sufficient, it's enough for them to accept the sovereignty of the Jewish people as far as paying taxes and being under our jurisdiction, but not in a religious sense. In other words, according to them, Tosfos, Ramban, and Ravad, there's no campaign for the Jewish nation to try to go out by force and wage a war with non-Jews and tell them, you must accept the 7, if not, we kill you. No. You want to conquer their land, you need to have other reasons, such as economic reasons. All right? That's the way it works. That's fine. And then even then, there's rules of war. You have to tell them that you're coming. You can't attack them by surprise. You have to give them the opportunity. I mean, all the details of what Maimonides, what the Rambam tells us in the Laws of Kings. But according to them, you don't have to go out and... It's not a commendable thing. Hey, let's go take over this country, because then either each individual will accept to keep the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and that's a tremendous gain that we've done for God's sake. Or, if they don't, then those individuals get killed. So it's a gain-gain. It's a win-win situation. That's the way the Rambam seems to look at it. That's a very commendable thing. And that the Jewish people, as long as they're able to do that, and if they have such a powerful king and an army, they really should. Everything's fine. We have the whole land of Israel, and we have a bunch of countries all over here, and everything is fine, and we have no reason to try to go conquer this land which is miles away from us. Well, the only reason would be we can force them to keep Sheva Mitzvot HaShem. The Rambam would seemingly say, go for it! Absolutely. You were commanded by God through Moses to have all of the inhabitants of the world to keep these 7 mitzvahs. All right, you have the ability. Go ahead. And then, of course, they have a choice. Keep the 7 or get killed. That's the Rambam. Tosfos, Ramban, and Ravad all seem to agree and say no. No. It has to be under specific circumstances that the individual is under our control, such as we keep giving the examples of the Ger Toishav or the Eved and so forth. Otherwise, no. When you do conquer another land for other reasons, don't mix in the 7 Noahide commandments. Ve'ein lilmoid mikan, and we shouldn't learn out from here. The Sfira Leila Tosfos, the Tosfos holds the muter laniach leben noach laved avodah zara. Don't make the mistake now, so to say, to the other extreme, and think that according to Tosfos, it's permissible for the Jewish people to allow a ben noach to transgress idolatry. Kirak v'lechemes harashus kasher ishlimu imanu haTorah kasher ishlimu imanu haTorah ripso isem leter. It's only in the case of an optional war where we, the Jewish people, are fighting against them, that in that case, there's a special allowance that we don't have to be concerned with their religious observance, and they can transgress the 7 as far as we're concerned. But anybody who is really under our control, but the Tosfos would agree, of course, that anybody who is directly under our control, such as these categories, the Ger Toishav, or an Eved, a non-Jewish slave, or a Yefas Toyar woman, then Tosfos would agree we must and can, and therefore must, force them to accept the 7. And if they don't, then they're put to death. Adarabba, and on the contrary, Mikushias HaTosfos nire the savru bepshitus the mitzvah Yisrael lakov bnei noach l'kaim Sheva Mitzvos. From Tosfos' question, from the very premise of how they asked the question. Remember, the question was, why is it that akum, that if there's a non-Jewish person who worships avodah zara and his life is hanging by a thread, the Jew is not to push him down. All right? And then they ask the question, why? He's an idolater. He's transgressing Sheva Mitzvot HaShem. From that question, it's clear that Tosfos holds that the Jewish people are obligated to get everyone to keep the 7 mitzvahs. Because if you don't say that, if you don't take that premise, then their whole question doesn't make any sense. What do you mean they're That's how Tosfos put it. That behold, they are transgressing the 7. What do we care what they're transgressing? What's in our business? Who cares? What kind of question is Tosfos even asking? Unless you're going to say that we do need to judge them. If you're going to say that the Jewish people are obligated to judge the non-Jew that's transgressing, then their question makes sense. Question is, why don't we push them down if they are transgressors? But if you say that it's none of our business, then what kind of question is that? And that's what the Talmud means, that an akum, a non-Jewish idolater, that there is no war between us and them, that we don't push them down. Meaning, you do not need to judge them. Top of page 38. But rather, it seems that the opinion of the Tosfos is indeed that the Jewish people are obligated and required to force the non-Jews to keep their commandments. And therefore, hikshu, now they ask the question, Tosfos, and now the question is in place and it makes perfect sense. Why don't we push them down? Since the assumption and the premise is that the Jew is obligated to force them to keep their mitzvahs, and if they don't keep it, it's a capital offense. Well, now I have the opportunity of a guy who's transgressing, whose life is hanging by a thread. Why is the rule that I shouldn't push him? On the contrary, of course, I should push him. That's their question. The tirtzu, and Tosfos answered, that there's a certain verse where the Torah includes them to give the allowance that we don't kill them. So from this we can clearly deduce that in a case where we don't have this extra exception or this allowance of the Torah, kloimar, meaning kasher ein matzav shel hashlama uchrisas bris, when it's not a situation of making peace with them or having a treaty with them, vein tachas yadeinu, and of course they're under our jurisdiction, then we are obligated to force them to do it. Because the answer Tosfos gave was, the Torah gives an allowance to keep them and not be concerned with their transgression. Why? Because it says that when you conquer a country which is not part of the biblical Holy Land, take them for paying taxes and serving you. Which clearly implies, don't worry about their observance or non-observance of the 7 mitzvahs. But it's only that particular case. In such a case where we are conquering them at war. Amnam yesh litchois. But now he says in the brackets, however, we could push this away. To the fi tiritz Tosfos atei rib sechuli maskanasim shein tzarich lakufin klal v'doichak. All right, he says there is room that one can argue and say that according to Tosfos' answer, it's when the Torah makes this allowance, it should be understood in the broader sense, meaning not only in that, literally in that particular case where the verse is talking about where the Jewish people are going out to an optional war, and then you want to make peace with them, and the peace that you're offering them is, we won't kill you, we won't attack, if you pay taxes and serve us. Which, in a broader sense, basically means that the Jews don't have to force the non-Jews to keep their mitzvahs. But he says that's a difficult way to understand it. It's not the simple reading of the Tosfos. He prefers to say that no, it's only in that case. Otherwise, if a Jew can, and it's not that particular case of a war and a treaty and all that, then we do have to force them to keep their 7. And furthermore, he's going to bring down another Tosfos now, also in Tractate Avodah Zarah, but this time it's on page 64b. The other one was 26b, and this is 64b in Avodah Zarah. Besugias ger teishav. Over there it is the topic, the Talmud is discussing the concept of the ger teishav. V'amakayim sheva mitzvahs. And we know that the ger teishav is the one who formally and officially keeps and observes the 7 mitzvahs. Sheikshu Tosfos. So over there, Tosfos asked, Lama loy harguhu lifnei shekibel olav 7 mitzvahs. Why didn't the Jewish people kill him before he accepted to keep the 7? Why did we even get to the point where he accepted the 7 and therefore he became a ger teishav and he wasn't killed? He should have been killed right away. V'tirtzu, and Tosfos there answered, that he's not killed until he is judged formally in a court. So Tosfos clearly maintains that this capital offense of transgressing the 7 they don't actually get the punishment, the capital punishment, unless it goes through the legal system of a court case. Barur bisfarasam, so it's clear from Tosfos' logic, sheyesh lahargoi imutachas yadenu, that we should kill him if he's under our control, under our hands. Elo desvirale de boydin. The only thing is, Tosfos holds that there has to be a proper court case. You can't just kill them. Yes, we do have control, and yes, it's a capital offense, and yes, they should, and I put that in quotes, they should be put to death. But they can't actually be put to death by any individual or individuals. This can't be a lynching scene, but rather it has to be through the proper court system. Just like the understanding of the Ravad, back in the laws of circumcision, chapter 1, which we brought on earlier. Because again, if you're not going to take that approach, then what's Tosfos' question here? What do we care what he's doing? How is Tosfos even asking? The Ger Toishav, before he became a Ger Toishav, before he accepted the 7 mitzvahs, he should have been already put to death. Why should he be put to death? What do we care about him? He's just a guy. He's my business. Why do I have to kill him? So obviously, Tosfos is of the understanding that you do have to. And he's bringing down a third Tosfos to support that they all hold the same thing. Oh, by the way, Tosfos doesn't always have to agree with Tosfos, because as mentioned earlier, Tosfos is not one person. Tosfos means additions in the plural, and it is many sages and commentaries of the Talmud, and therefore we find oftentimes the Tosfos within one Tosfos on the same page, in the same Tosfos, there could be arguing opinions, which obviously cannot be the case in the Rambam, nor in Rashi, nor in the Ramban, nor in the Ravad, because that is a particular individual. So when we see a contradiction between the Rambam in one place and the Rambam elsewhere, we have to deal with it and reconcile how it's not a contradiction. When we see one commentary of Rashi on one page of the Talmud stating one thing, and then you'll find elsewhere that Rashi states something clearly different, that's a contradiction which needs to be reconciled. Not so in the case of Tosfos. Unless, of course, it says the name of which member of the Tosfos it is, and if it's the same person, then of course. But be that as it may, we have a third Tosfos over here. And this one is in the Tractate of Chagiga, 13a. The Kosvu, that the Tosfos there wrote as follows. Mitzvah limsar lahem. It is a mitzvah for the Jewish people to give over to them, or nusach acher lelamdam, or there's a different text that reads that it should say to teach them. Zayin mitzvahs, the 7 commandments. There's a mitzvah for the Jewish people to instruct, to teach, to give over the 7 commandments to them. And seemingly, what kind of a mitzvah is there? What commandment? Unless you're going to say that the Jewish people do have an obligation and a commandment to try to influence them to keep their mitzvahs. So obviously, Tosfos himself also holds that it's an obligation for the Jewish people to campaign, to promote the observance of the 7 Noahide commandments. V'chein das hasmag, and so too is the opinion of the smag. The smag actually preceded a little bit all of the above. The smag came before the Tosfos, as well as before all the others that we mentioned, and it's an acronym for Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol. And he enumerates all 613 commandments. So the Smag says, we, the Jewish people, may not make peace or make a treaty when we're going out for this optional war outside of the land of Israel, unless they accept the 7 Noahide commandments. Similar to what we had the Rambam say. Rambam held this as well. So the Smag also says that we can only allow them to live and to be under our jurisdiction and to pay taxes and to live in peace if they accept upon themselves to keep the 7. And as far as the case of the Yifas Toyar woman, so the Smag writes, Lo yiratzisa, if she does not want to remain and become Jewish, mikabeles sheva mitzvos shnitzavu b'nei Noach, she then needs to accept the 7 Noahide commandments, umishalcha lenafsha, and then the soldier, the man who took her, sends her free. Pashut, so it's obvious, the soiver that the smag holds, the koifi nachrim and l'chemes harishus, that we do force non-Jews in the optional war, the fastoyer l'kalisha mitzvahs, and likewise the fastoyer, we do force her to accept the 7 commandments. The only thing is, the smag did not write that if the fastoyer refuses to accept the 7 mitzvahs, that she should be put to death. And we already explained previously that the smag holds, like the Ravad, that we can force them only through the system of the court, but not individually. The next part, which is still in the same thing, well, I think we should really do it. V'chein das ha'meiri, another one of the Rishonim. This again would be a contemporary of all of the above, of the Rambam, the Ravad, the Preface. The Meiri, Shehetik Svaras HaRambam, he writes down the Rambam's opinion, the Fastoyar, with regards to the Fastoyar case, that he forces her to accept the 7 mitzvahs, that the sons of Noach were commanded. So the Meiri says the same thing. L'maskana. In conclusion, in summation, after all that we've been discussing, Harbe Rishonim, many of the early codifiers, Soivrim Karambam, hold indeed like Maimonides, like the Rambam, the Koifin B'nei Noach L'kaim Sheva Mitzvahs, that the Jewish people force the B'nei Noach to keep the 7 commandments. Usvaras HaRavad, Toisfes, Smag, the Sefer HaChinuch, and the opinion of these contemporaries of the Rambam, Deloi mishtamshim be'emtzoi kfiyah, that we do not use means of force, shelvim lav yehareg, that if not, they will be put to death. According to the Rambam, we need to force them, and if they don't, then we kill them. According to these others, no, we do need to get them to keep the Sheva Mitzvahs. The Jewish people do have that obligation, and they may not be passive, and they may not, quote-unquote, mind their own business, but not to the extent of killing them. L'loi dinu mishpat, without having a proper judgment in a proper court case. D'loi nitztavinu laharga miyad, im lo yikablu, for we were not commanded to kill them immediately if they don't accept them. But we are commanded to judge them for not keeping the 7, so long as they're under our jurisdiction. And according to all of the others, except for the Rambam, if they do transgress even a single one of the 7 Noahide commandments, they shall be brought to court and they shall be put to death through the legal system. And so too, the Chinuch writes, and again this is one of the codifiers that lists all 613 commandments, and he devotes a paragraph to each one of the 613. He goes in the order of the Torah, according to the Parsha of the week. And the Chinuch says, She'anu nadun oisam, that we shall judge them. V'nireh, and it appears, Shegam Ramban maskim lekach, she'nadun kol shetachas yadeinu lemisa, im yavru al zayin mitzvahs b'nei Noach. That the Ramban too seems to also agree that any of the nations or any non-Jew that is under our control and our jurisdiction, that we indeed will judge them to be killed if they transgress any of the 7. Das Rambam den Itztavin V'al Yidei Moshe Lakuf es Kol Boi Oilam L'Kabel Sheva Mitzvos. B'chol Mikre. The Rambam's opinion, getting back to the Rambam, is that we, the Jewish people, were commanded to force all the people in the world to accept the 7 commandments in any case. Gam Kishen Yodenu Takifa, even when our hand is not strong and we don't have control in the jurisdiction over them. And again, it appears that the Ravad ideally or theoretically agrees with the Rambam because he does not say anything, he does not argue and differ when the Rambam makes this statement. So the Ravad agrees that in theory, we always have to force the non-Jews to keep their 7 mitzvahs. However, das Shara Rishonim Amum Bazeh. The opinion of the other Rishonim, besides for the Rambam and the Ravad, all the others, their opinion is not necessarily exactly as such. Question. Ha'im nitztavinu, are we indeed, the Jewish people, commanded, Lakuf kol boi ha'olam l'kabel sheva mitzvahs, to accept, for all the people of the world to accept these 7? Is it the responsibility of the Jews to force them to come to that point? Gam kasher ein yodenu takif aleim, even in a situation where the Jewish hand is not ruling over them? Dat kan shamanu kasher yodenu takif shnidunaisam. Till this point, the whole discussion is only when we do have control. So then we have to judge them. And we can't just do it individually. We have to judge them in a court. Fine. Ach bizman shein yodenu takifa. But what do we do in a situation where our hand, the Jewish people, don't have a strong hold? And we can't judge them. We can't bring them to a court and judge them for transgressing. So from where do we know that we indeed have an obligation to force them to keep their 7 commandments with means less than forcing them through the legal system? However, it does seem, just logically, if we are commanded to force them to keep their 7 mitzvahs, just because we're unable to do it through a legal system and bring them to court, why would that change our obligation that we still need to do whatever we possibly can to get them to keep the 7, even if we don't have the means to enforce it through a legal system? And therefore, the obligation is still absolutely 100% there, as long as we're able to. And any which means we're able to, we still need to. So it's not like, well, now we don't have the power to bring them to any court and to force them to keep it, so we have no choice and we just have to walk away from it. No. Whatever we can do, we need to do. And so too seems to be implied the commandment of the Torah, as the Sifri explains with regards to the case of the Yifas Torah woman. The Sifri says, send her to her freedom, but not to her idolatrous place. But in that case, when she doesn't want to become Jewish, and the 12 months went by, and she wants to remain non-Jewish, he's sending her wherever she wants to go. She becomes free. So what do you mean, send her free for her life, but not to her idolatrous place? She can go wherever she wants. Once he sends her out, she's not under our control. We don't keep in touch with her. We have no control over her. She's leaving the land of Israel, and she can go wherever she wants. So why kill her? Send her out of Israel to her father's home and let her do whatever she wishes, whatever she pleases. Just because before we send her out, until that point that we free her, she's under our control. Therefore, we should kill her? She's about to be set free. Ela mistaber de zadin klali b'chol matzav sheish efshoros shel kviya al nochri lekabel anu tzrichim lasos kein. Rather, it makes sense logically to say, based on all of this, that this is a general rule, a general law, and that is that in any given situation, even if the Jewish people don't have sovereignty or control through the government, but in any way that we have an ability to force the non-Jew to accept them, we're obligated to do so. For this is the will of the Torah, that we, the Jews, should force them to keep the 7 mitzvahs, whichever way possible. So if I can't kill them, don't kill them. If I can't bring them to court to do it through the legal system, then don't do it that way. Do whatever you can. But there's an obligation to be active and to try to influence them or, quote-unquote, force, whatever that means, to whatever extent that practically means in each given situation. And that being the case, so what's the difference whether I'm forcing them by threatening to kill them, and if I can't do that, so then I can force them in a very pleasant way, whatever that means, just by simply explaining to them. And what's the difference whether they live amongst us in the land of Israel or they live outside the land of Israel? It makes no difference. The point is that every Jew is obligated to influence, quote unquote, to force any and every non-Jew that he can reach to keep these 7 commandments. And if the only forcing element is to be pleasant and nice and try to get them on board because they'll understand this is the will of God, this is the will of the Torah, it's for their own best interest, whatever the case is, that's what needs to be done. So everybody agrees at bottom line that it is an obligation, even in our current situation where the Jewish people can surely not kill anybody for not accepting it, and you can't kill them in this way or the other way, can't even threaten them. Fine, so no threats and no killing. But still, they need to be brought to understand, and therefore there's the concept of forcing someone not with a threat and not with a stick, not with a sword, but rather with a candy, or rather with sugarcoating it, or being very positive and very nice, and that can be very compelling as well. All right, that brings us up to page 40 for next time. And until next time, I'm wishing everyone well and success in the study and in upholding and in promoting and fulfilling and keeping the 7 Noahide commandments, and ultimately bringing about the perfect world the way that God has intended all the way back from before the beginning, so that we can have the complete revelation of our righteous Mashiach now.